Our next presentation is meant to demystify a lot of the processes, legal processes around fundraising, right? We heard from Michael Seibel and Tian Zhou about, the strategy around it, how do you go talk to venture capitalists, but here our hope is that now you walk away with a better understanding of the intricacies of the financing from the legal side and to learn a few tips that will help you get the best terms for your company. So with that, let me tell you a little bit more about our next presenter. A close friend of mine, somebody I have the pleasure of working with every day, Hans Kim, is managing partner at Atrium. He is a veteran corporate and securities lawyer with over 20 years of legal experience. He's previously worked at Paul Weiss in New York and Tokyo, Kim and Chang in Seoul, and Wilson Sonsini in Palo Alto. So very much a big law background. Hans has also founded several technology companies, so has a lot of your DNA as well, and is a member of the State Bar of New York and California. So with that, let me intro Hans. Come up here and get him.
Thank you, Joanna. So my topic is financing fundamentals, but before I jump into the topic, I want to congratulate all of you for starting your companies. I know it's hard. You put a lot out on the line, you take the risk, maybe you've left a high-paying job. I just really want to congratulate you and pat you on the back and applaud you for starting a company and trying to make this a better world. So thank you. And I'm very proud to be part of Atrium, to have a community that can bring everybody together and talk about startups, and to make startups more of a community so we can help each other in making this a better world. So my topics are going to be about financing structures. We're going to focus on some of these structures that you probably are all very familiar with: safes, convertible notes, preferred stock. We're going to go into financing strategy, and then we'll finish with other considerations and Q&A. In terms of early financing structures, these are some of the ways that you might raise money for your startup. Now, the sweet spot really is the mid part of this, which are the safes and convertible notes and the preferred stock financings. And that's what you're probably going to focus on, and this presentation is going to focus on those structures. But in the years of experience, I've done a handful of common stock deals. In certain deals, investors have asked for common stock. There may be various reasons that they ask for common stock. There may be regulatory issues in terms of the investment coming in from a foreign investor. There may be issues in terms of investor doesn't really understand what a preferred stock is. They may think that they don't really understand all of these preferences and they just want simple documentation. If you raise with common stock, you just have to remember that it does impact your 409A valuation, the valuation of your common stock, the valuation that you price your options at. And so it may impact the way you are able to incentivize your employees. Debt is a very common way that startups get off the ground. Founders can loan money to the company to pay things like the incorporation fees or to pay for the rent. You may have friends and family who are just loaning you money to get it off the ground. They're not really interested in taking equity. They may just want to give you some money and not really expect a return. But this is not really a way to finance your company at an early stage. Investors want equity. They want the upside that equity gives them. If you are a later stage company that's taken venture capital money, there's a whole venture debt market that's available to you. If you're not familiar with that, you should become familiar. If you've got VC money, you should talk to those venture debt lenders, as that can be a good way to further finance your company. The bottom two are other ways: product crowdfunding. If you've got a really interesting consumer product idea, and you can put together a snazzy video, you can go on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, advertise your product, pre-sell your product before it's even developed. It's an idea in your mind, and it's a great way to raise money without giving up any equity, no dilution. If you can sell persons on your product before it's developed, go ahead and do that. That's just a good way to do that. Just keep in mind that when you do pre-sell your product in that manner, you have an obligation to deliver on that product. It's not equity, there's no equity obligation, but there's an obligation to deliver on the product. And there are cases where founders have taken money from those crowdfunding sites and squandered the money or not used the money really for product development, failed to deliver product, and a lot of those companies are being investigated right now. So you definitely want to avoid that. Plus, it's your reputation on the line. As a founder, if you advertise a product and you say you're going to deliver on a product and you give all these specs, you should deliver that product. It's your name, it's your reputation. And that is so important in the Valley. It's a small community. And so please keep that in mind if you go that route. Finally, token, crypto, blockchain. That's really a very specialized area. We have a group here at Atrium that advises on those. That's highly specialized. You need good professional advice, regulatory advice with securities lawyers, with the lawyers who understand the money transmitter licenses and other issues. Safes and convertible notes. What is a safe? So many of you are familiar with safes. How many persons in this room have raised money through safes? Wow, it's really high percentage, and that's what I expected. It has become the instrument of choice for early stage fundraising. Simple agreement for future equity. It's a simple concept. Investors provide you the money. You sign a couple-page agreement, form agreement that was put out by Y Combinator in 2013. And basically it says that the money will convert into preferred stock at the time you have a preferred stock financing. The conversion into preferred stock can be at a discount, so there's a discount feature on some of the versions of the safe. And some of the safes have a valuation cap. Basically says that when it converts over into preferred stock, the investor gets a cap on the valuation that's used to calculate how many shares that they get. This is kind of an important feature for investors because if they keep financing a startup and the first round of financing the startup goes through is $1 billion valuation, the investor gets a 20% discount on a $1 billion valuation. It's not really a good investment for the investor for that stage risk. If they gave you the money early on, right after incorporation, and they only get to invest in your company in an $800 million valuation, it doesn't really compensate the investor for the amount of risk they took to get you off the ground. So down here are the different versions of the safe. Another version of safe is one that has no valuation cap, no discount. And this is a type of bridge safe. Some of you have raised money already. So maybe you've raised money, you're between A and B or B and C, and you're anticipating a raise, you're a hot company, there are investors lining up to invest in your company. You can suggest, oh, why don't we just take your money with a safe that says it will convert over into the next round of financing. Maybe if your company's hot enough, you don't have to give a discount. You don't have to put a valuation cap in. It just says, hey, just give me your money, it'll convert over. It's a good way to bridge your company in between financings. Say you're not ready, you haven't hit the milestone, and there are investors lining up to give you money. Well, take that money, and if they're willing to invest in a convertible security that converts over into your next round at the next round's pricing, there's not really, that's a no-brainer. Just take that money. It really makes a lot of sense. It's a great instrument. Really applaud Y Combinator for coming out with that instrument in 2013. It really has revolutionized the way we raise money for startups. To complicate things, though, Y Combinator came out with another version of the safe, what they call the post-money safe. How many of you in this room have heard of this post-money safe? So again, a good portion, but fewer than before. So it's important to understand that there are two versions of safes out there right now. There's a pre-money safe, there's a post-money safe. The pre-money safe is the 2013 version, where the calculation in terms of the number of shares that you get are based on a pre-money valuation cap, if that's one of the terms in your safe. The post-money safe is based on a post-money valuation cap. And there's a big difference between the two. And if you have raised on either one of these safes, you need to know the difference. For example, if you've raised on a post-money safe and you have a valuation cap and you had a targeted round, and say it was $2 million on a $20 million post-money cap, you understand you gave 10% of the company up. But if you continue to raise on convertible securities after that, all the dilution is going to happen only to the founders and the other stockholders. So it doesn't really make sense for you to keep raising money on convertible securities. What does make sense is for you to get to that financing as soon as possible. So you have to understand, if you've raised on a post-money safe, make sure that money lasts you enough until you get to that Series A or the Series B or whatever the round is. Second thing, with the pre-money safe, it's different. A lot of companies, it was so successful, a lot of companies just kept raising money on safes. The dilution was actually spread across all of the safes and the original shareholders. So companies could actually do a rolling safe, and they could actually have increasing valuation caps and try to mimic various stages of financings. It was such a successful note, and the investor, for some companies, the investor demand to invest in these companies was so hot that I've seen companies raise literally over $100 million on safes at different valuation caps, and seeing the valuation caps go up and up and up. So you have to be careful. So talk to a lawyer if you do those types of rounds, because the math gets very complicated. Some of the defined terms get complicated. It really is a huge math problem to figure out. Convertible notes. So some investors still don't understand safes. Even though safes have been out for 6 years, billions have been raised, thousands of companies, lots of successful companies, a lot of happy investors on safes. There's still some investors out there who say that they prefer or they demand that the financing instrument be a convertible note. Convertible note is basically really the predecessor before the safe. It's a convertible instrument. It is debt. So you have to negotiate the interest rate and a maturity date. And you have to negotiate all these other terms. One of the disadvantages of a convertible note is that there's no real standard form of convertible note. All these different law firms have different forms. And so when you negotiate, each side has to hire a lawyer. You have to go back and forth on terms. There are different negotiable terms that you have to go through. A safe is really easy. It's 3 pages. Everybody has agreed that that's the form. You fill in a couple of numbers, boom, you're off. It reduces the cost. You're fast. It's really simple. It's great. But the convertible notes, it just gets a little more complicated. If that's the only money, it's only going to come through a convertible note. I wouldn't really get hung up on it. You can get a convertible note done fairly quickly. Doesn't take as much time as a preferred stock financing, but it is another way that startups get financed. Preferred stock. So what is preferred stock? Preferred stock is basically equity that has preferential rights, preferred rights. It's different than common stock. Common stock is issued to founders. Basically, it says everybody's equal, they're all common, you share pro rata if you sell the company or you liquidate the company, you're all common, you're all equal. Preferred rights have preferred stock have preferred rights. That's why I call it preferred stock. The most important preferred right is liquidation preference. You really should understand the liquidation preference of your company at all times. What is liquidation preference? It's just a fancy term that says investors get their money back first. That's all it means. Investor gives you money, says, there you go, I invest in your company. I don't want common stock. I don't want the founders to get any penny before I get my money back. So that's all it means. I get my money back first. Now, there are different types of liquidation preferences. So in term sheets that you may be negotiating 1x liquidation preference, or 2x, or 3x. What does that mean? Well, if there's a multiple next to the liquidation preference, it means the investor's asking for a multiple of their investment before the common get their money back. So 2x liquidation preference means give me my money back plus 100% return, and then common will get the money. 3x, obviously 3 times, and then you get your money. So thankfully, we're in an environment where there's a lot of money out there. Most term sheets, 1x liquidation preference is standard. If you don't see that, that's a big red flag, right? It's a big red flag. You might see 2x, 3x, maybe those types of terms if it's a down round, or if your company's failing, right? And this is just sort of desperate, and investors like, it's really risky. If I'm going to take this risk, I'm going to ask for these types of terms. The other term is participating or non-participating. So participating preferred means that they get their money back, plus they participate with what common gets, okay? Non-participating means they don't participate. So if you have 1x non-participating preferred, it means you get your money, the investor gets their money back, and that's it. Then you're like, well, why would investors invest in this equity? That's all they get, their money back. Well, because there's a conversion feature that says, well, you get your money back, but if things are really good, you're going to want to convert your shares of preferred stock into common stock, and then you share a pro rata, right? So in a good scenario, all the preferred converts over to common, everybody shares pro rata, life is good. Other preferences with preferred stock include board seats, anti-dilution protection. Basically says that if you raise additional rounds at lower prices, then the preferred stockholders get additional shares. Protected provisions. This is a class of shares. Preferred is a class of shares. They may ask for certain protected provisions that say, you need a majority of the preferred holders to agree to a certain thing happening, like sale of company. And so those are heavily negotiated in preferred stock financing documents. Dividend provisions, usually not heavily negotiated. Usually it's just the preference that's there, but usually these companies don't pay out dividends. Redemption, that's something less common today, but there is a provision that could say that, hey, you have to pay back my money at a certain date, a redemption feature. Less common these days. And preemptive right, pro rata right, basically means investors can invest in future rounds of financing to maintain their pro rata percentage interest in the company. That is a very heavily fought after right. Many of you have probably had to fight these fights with side letters or through your SAFE agreements, and you're like, you may be asking, well, why are people fighting so much about investing more money into my company? It's because VCs, when they have a winner, they want to maximize their return. So they want to put as much money into the winners as possible. It's a very important right for professional investors, and you just have to respect that. But these days, right now, they took that preemptive right out of the standard SAFE. So in the post-money SAFE, they took that out. It's in the side letter, and you can negotiate that by investor by investor. Series A preferred stock documents. So I just listed out the 5 main documents in a preferred stock financing. Includes a certificate of incorporation, which is basically the constitutional document of the company. It lists out the preferred rights of the preferred stock. It's filed with the state of Delaware. Series A preferred stock purchase agreement sets forth the price per share, the number of shares being sold. Includes reps and warranties of the company that says things like company owns all of the IP. Company has complied with all laws. Investor rights agreement sets forth more rights of the investors, including registration rights, pro rata investment rights, and other rights. Right of first refusal and co-sale agreement. That's another agreement that basically says if founder sells his or her shares, then the investor gets to have a first right to buy those shares or co-sell, sell together with the founder. They don't want founders doing anything with their shares without the investors having at least a right to buy or at least a right to sell. And lastly, the voting agreement basically locks in the directors, who the directors are in the company. It's probably a couple hundred pages of documents here, heavily negotiated. Expect to pay anywhere from $30,000 to $70,000 for fully negotiated documents from your lawyer. And on top of that, the standard documents call for you to pay the investor's lawyer. Pretty egregious, but that's how we grew up. So you not only do you have to pay for your lawyer, but you have to pay for the investor's lawyer. And so it's a very expensive process, can take 2 to 6 weeks to finalize. There's a due diligence process. There's a lot of effort, cost, time with lawyers. It's time away from your product. So it really is a time-consuming process, and you have to be prepared for that. Series C preferred stock. So another type of preferred stock, Series C preferred stock, is a simplified set of Series A documents. You don't have to go through all 5 documents. Sometimes this is just 1 or 2 documents, and it sets forth all the rights of the preferred. And it strips out most of the stuff that are the sort of the advanced rights of preferred stock. You can see form documents on seriesc.com. A lot cheaper to negotiate. It's just it's faster to close. A lot of times we got a question, safe versus preferred stock. Why safe? Why preferred stock? As I said, safe is really the instrument of choice for early stage. Preferred stock, it may be because some investors refuse to invest in safes or convertible securities. Safe with discount actually may result in a worse economics for a company upon conversion. And you say, well, how does that happen? Well, you have to understand that your convertible securities out there, your safes and your convertible securities, are full ratchet instruments, what we call full ratchet. What does that mean? That means that, well, if you do a low price financing, well, all of those securities that were out there, and say they were at they're discount securities, those investors get to buy those shares or convert over at a discount, say typically 20% to the price that those investors come in. So there's a little bit of thinking there that, hey, your valuation is this amount. This is what people are willing to come in at a preferred stock price. Should I lock that price in with these investors? Or is everything's going to be great and the valuation will go up and the conversion will be at a much higher price than that price, right? Or on the downside scenario, if you raise at a low price, there's massive dilution that will happen. The calculation that you had in your head about what percent of the company you're giving up has just been blown up. The founders are going to get a very small piece of the company. Let me turn to financing strategy. Make sure you raise enough to get traction to raise a Series A or have a plan to get there. So this is something that was talked about early in the earlier presentations in terms of how you time out your Series A financing. You don't want to be in a desperate position asking for money. That is the wrong time to ask for money. You want to be in a position of strength, and you want to have a plan and make sure that you map out your financing strategy beforehand. You got to give thought to that. What are your milestones? What's going to get you? What's going to get you traction? Like, how do you plan that out? And the Series A these days might actually be the 4th round of financing for your company. You've got the friends and family. You might be an accelerator incubator. We've got companies that have done multiple accelerators and incubators. Angels and Series A. So you're going through that. You just understand how much you're raising and what milestones that gets you to, the traction that you expect, so that you come in with a good story at your Series A. Do the math. So I always tell founders, listen, do the math, right? Make the effort to run your pro forma cap table. It's very, very important to understand that dilution that's happening to your company as you raise money. We've got a lot of founders out there who keep raising money on safes, and they don't realize what's happening to their cap table upon conversion. So you got to do the math. And I just have a couple of slides here that say at initial capitalization of Bill and Ted and their excellent adventure, they have 45%, somebody got that reference, 45% each, 10% for an option plan. They have a safe financing. So the angels, they get 10% that will convert over. And then the Series A, Bill and Ted end up with close to over 50%, but the option plan, the Series A investors ask for an expanded option plan. That takes 15%. The angel investors get squeezed to about 7%. This is rounded. And then the Series A financiers come in at 25%. It's really important to understand the dilution that's happening to your company, and you got to map that out. Work with Excel or with some professional. We do that. We have a pro forma cap table generator at Atrium that can help you do that. It actually makes it really quick, and so we can run those scenarios for you. But it's really important to understand as you do your financing what happened to dilution. Some of the surprises that we've had recently are with founders that have just kept raising with safes. And they didn't realize all the dilution that was happening. And when they actually raised their Series A, they looked at the pro forma cap table and they were really shocked to see that the founders only own 20% of the company. So you got to understand that. That's on the downside. It's too easy to raise money with safes. It's like, oh, you know what? Let me keep writing. It's like writing checks. It's like these, and you just keep. But eventually, that's going to all convert over into shares. And so you have to understand what's happening to your cap table. On the flip side, the most successful raise that I've seen, there was one founder who I worked with who raised $1 million on a $10 million valuation cap safe. It was a lone single founder. He took that $1 million. He went to Vietnam. He got some developers, none of them who wanted equity. They just wanted cash. And he built the whole product. Took 2 years to develop a product. Came back and was able to raise a Series A at a $100 million valuation. So he raised $20 million on a $100 million post-money valuation. So he gave 20% on the Series A. He'd given up 10% on the safe. So there's a sole founder who had 70% of the company after the Series A. So that's the flip side. Understand leverage. The how, the who, the what. So I think some of these were touched upon earlier in terms of building up leverage. Multiple term sheets. There's nothing better to get the price up when you have multiple bidders, whether it be an M&A, a financing, any type of negotiation. Have multiple bidders. You're going to get that price up. You can go back and forth, get that price higher and higher. Second, no need for money. If you have the luxury of being able to walk away from money, that's leverage. Third, successful product. If you launch a successful product, there are people sort of knocking down your door to get in on your round. 4, team, past success. It's really important, I think, in the Valley. Again, it's a small community, but these serial entrepreneurs are out there, and a lot of professional investors just want to throw money at these successful entrepreneurs. If you've had past success, it really does carry a lot of weight in the Valley. There's that saying that past performance doesn't guarantee future results. That's just lawyer speak. Lawyers make you do that to these funds. But in terms of investment philosophy, a lot of people look at past performance to gauge how people are going to do in the future. It is common sense. If someone's been very successful in the past, that's a track record. It does make sense. And that's why VCs really look for people who have that experience. And lastly, market timing. So certain industries go up and they go down. All right? Certain industries are hot, and you got to know when your industry's hot. Raise when it's hot, because you get lots of money coming in the door if it's hot. For example, self-driving cars. That was a hot thing, right? Money was all going in there. Right now, AI, machine learning, hot topic. Lots of money going into machine learning and AI. AR, VR, used to be. Now it's kind of taking a little bit of a backseat to some of these other technologies. The who, angels, VCs, corporate strategic. Understand who you're selling to, what they are looking for. So angels, they just want a ticket in. They just want to get in the door. And you can do some things about timing in terms of how you raise. So say you want to raise on safes and not convertible notes, then raise first with those investors who are willing to raise on safes, because then if you understand the angel mindset, they just want to get in the door. So if you start raising with safes, then there's a lot of pressure for everybody else to come in on safes. All right? If you start with a convertible note, then everybody else that's following on will want convertible notes. And then you got these convertible notes that have interest rate, maturity date. You start strategizing that fashion. VCs, as was spoken earlier, they're looking for the home run. Huge hit. They want huge returns on their money. And you have to understand that that's what they're looking for. And you have to look at your company and really decide whether you should be going after the VC money. Whether you have that grand strategy that's the multi-billion-dollar exit that they're looking for. Because I will tell you, there are plenty of companies that shouldn't be chasing after VC money. They don't need that dilution. They don't need that money to basically dilute them. And I have founders who come in and they want to own the whole company and they're able to finance it another way. They own the whole company upon exit, and they got a $50 million exit. They owned the whole company. They didn't take VC money. They actually got funded in other ways, strategic money. This was in the life sciences field where there was actually a strategic investor who was willing to fund all of the development and say at the end of the day, well, we have an option to buy your company. And that's what they did. They built their company. The 4 founders kept 25% each. They sold out at $50 million, and they had a nice exit at the end of the day. If they had gone the VC route, they might have raised round after round after round, and they might have been directed to have this grand vision, and they would have been diluted to a small percentage. And in that case, that risk, they might have had to have billion-dollar valuation in order to get the same type of exit. So think about that as you plan out your financing. There's a recent statistic that said 20% of money is coming in through these corporate strategics right now. Expect that number to go up. It's a big increase in the past 5 years. And the what? What's at stake here? Valuation. Obviously, valuation, you want to prevent dilution, so valuation is heavily negotiated. But valuation is not the only thing. For VCs, you're actually bringing on a new partner. As someone was saying earlier, you're interviewing like an employee, somebody who's going to join you on the board, someone who could help you to grow your company. So it's really important that you have alignment in your vision for the company, and that you trust that they have the expertise and the background and that they're going to help you to build that company. Not to lead the company, right? No, but to help you. They have lots of resources. These VCs have tremendous resources, and they see a lot of things. They have visibility on a lot of trends in the industry, and they can help you to get to the next level. They have a lot of contacts. They open up their Rolodexes for key members to add to your team. So consider all of those things. And this is a person that you have to see. It's a relationship. You have to see them at board meetings again and again and again. So make sure that there is a good fit in terms of that marriage that you're about to enter into. Board control, very important. It's very important to understand that once you lose board control, you've lost control of the company. The board controls the company, regardless of what the cap table says in terms of what percentage you own. I've seen cases where founders think they own half the company in terms of the percentage of stock, but they've agreed to a voting agreement where 3 of the directors are not controlled by them, and it's 2 founders. They've lost control. What does that mean? That means the board can terminate their employment, can go a different direction, can liquidate the company, things like that you have to understand. Super voting stock. So to counter that, there are different things that founders with leverage can ask for or demand for in their documents. One is super voting stock. It's more and more common these days, especially with experienced founders who asks for their stock to have 10x voting power, for example. So now they've got this super voting stock, and they can outvote everybody, and they can maintain control of the company. Mark Pincus, who founded Zynga, there's a very famous story where one of his companies, he was kicked out. It was a company that he had founded, and he decided that that wasn't going to happen to him again. So when he founded Zynga, he founded it and made sure that he had super voting stock. And he kept that, and he maintained control of the company even through going public. Other things to watch out for in term sheets are things like founder vesting. So some of you founders have been working for 2, 3, 4 years. Now you're fully vested in the stock that you had purchased, this founder stock. It's like a 4-year commitment. I should be 100% invested. But when the VCs come in, they may say, if I invest in your company, you're no longer tied to the company. You could walk out the door, and I'm left without my team. So they may ask you for founder to revest your shares, set back the clock. And that may not be fair. So, but if you have leverage, if you've got this type of leverage, then maybe you can push back against that. We see that more and more often because these seed rounds are lasting longer and longer, and we've got more and more companies that are 3, 4, 5 years into it, all based on seed financing. Lastly, secondaries. So that is the thing that's happening. Secondary basically means that founders get to sell some shares, take some money off the table at the time of the financing. Used to be that investors didn't like founders taking money off the table. They wanted to keep you locked in. But because it's taking longer and longer for these companies to get to Series A or to Series B or to IPO, liquidity concerns for founders is a real issue. It's very expensive to live here in the Bay Area. And so if you've got leverage, it may make sense for you to say, hey, can I take some money off the table? Right? I'd like to buy a house. I'd like to pay for my kids' education. I like to do things. So keep that in mind. If you build up leverage, you can think about a secondary. We've seen secondaries even as early as Series A. Founders taking some money off the table at Series A. Take advantage of advisors. Very important. There's a huge community of startup people, serial entrepreneurs, attorneys, consultants, etc. A lot of free advice. It's on the internet. It's here in this room. It's just, we live in an area, we're blessed to be in Silicon Valley, where every other person is starting a company or wants to start a company. And so there's just a lot of people who are knowledgeable about the space. Take advantage of advisors. A lot of people out there willing to help. They may ask later for advisor shares or something else, but you know, do that if it's fair. But in the meantime, there's a lot of free advice. Take advantage of the free advice. Attend events like this. There's lots of other events like this. As an attorney, I'd be remiss for not going through this whole presentation without mentioning some legal considerations. So I've got this last slide on legal considerations. Securities laws. Understand that when you sell safes, convertible notes, preferred stock, these are securities. There are laws regulating securities. You cannot sell securities unless you've registered those securities. That means like IPO, unless there's an exemption. So you have to understand the exemptions under securities laws. So you should work with an attorney to understand whether your offering is exempt. You should understand there are certain things that we generally advise. Avoid public solicitation, basically advertising that you're raising money. I've seen companies out there handing out flyers that say, here's my product, and at the bottom it says, when we're raising money, please invest in my company, at the bottom. That's a public solicitation. Don't do that unless you're actually going through a process to raise money. Accredited investors. So again, there's a distinction between accredited investors. These are sophisticated investors who meet a certain financial sophistication. My recommendation is always to just sell to accredited investors, but there are some exceptions. You should talk to an attorney about that. Due diligence process. Make sure your legal documents are in order. If you get to the Series A, the last thing you want to do is be held up because the legal documents are a mess, because you don't have a bunch of papers that are not signed. you have an old co-founder who was there at the beginning of the company who terminated, and you never got their signature that says that this person doesn't own half the company. So this is a very common story right now for very successful companies out there, that even the most successful companies out there, that where there's a piece of paper that shows up at the last second that says some old founder owns part of the company. I'm talking about Cruise, I think Snap had that, Facebook had that, a number of these companies. So make sure all that legal documentation is in order, because if it's found out, then that could really delay you and slow you in the closing. And that's the point about promised equity issued. So make sure a cap table is bulletproof. That's a really important thing, because the last thing you want to do is have to run these numbers again and again, because all of the investor numbers are keyed off of who owns what in the cap table. Okay, thank you. That's the end of my presentation. We'll switch over to Q&A.